Hi, so my name is Emily Van Dyke, and today I'm going to talk to you about early intervention and prevention for kids with autism. I chose this topic because early intervention is really important to me. Having a brother who had autism, I understand the struggles of what life can be like growing up for them, and I know that my brother did not get the services that he needed, and I've seen him suffer for it. So I really want to advocate for kids getting early intervention services. I also hope to be, when I grow up or when I graduate, I hope to either be an early interventionist, or I hope to be working in a special education classroom with kids who are in that early childhood age. So let's jump right in. So the first thing we need to discuss is, what is it? What is early intervention and prevention? Well, you might ask, and I'm going to tell you, it is basically just a system of services that help babies and toddlers with developmental delays or disabilities, and they either will prevent those disabilities from getting worse or help them to get better in the future, and maybe even possibly get rid of any of the delays and help them to catch up. Early intervention focuses on helping eligible babies and toddlers learn those basic and brand new skills that typically develop during the first 3 years of life. A few of those skills would be physical developmental skills, so anything like reaching, rolling, crawling, walking, anything that interferes with your physical development and how you're growing. Next is going to be cognitive development. So this could be how you're thinking, how you learn, if you can solve problems, things like that. Um, Next is your communication skills. If you can talk, for one, are you able to listen? Are you able to understand what is going on? Next is going to be social and emotional developmental skills. So, can you play alongside and with other students? Does the child feel secure and happy? Do they trust other people? And lastly is going to be your self help, which is going to be things like eating and dressing yourself, or pretty much anything that is required for taking care of yourself on your own. Um, Something that I believe is really important in special education is going to be IDEA. This is especially important with early intervention, and I just want to talk about it for a little bit because free and appropriate public education, also known as FAPE, um, plays a big role in early intervention, and you'll see why in just a second. IDEA basically emphasizes special education related services that should be given to a child to allow them to um, meet their needs and prepare them for the future, whether it be for education or employment or for living on their own. Now, the reason why FAPE is so important is because early intervention falls under FAPE, making it so that public schools are required to provide early intervention for students that need it. And oftentimes, if parents aren't getting those services, they can go up to the school and say that they're not meeting the requirements for FAPE, and that you'll hopefully get rid of their problems. Um, there are 6 main steps to IDEA, and FAPE is just the first one. So the next step that we're going to go over is going to be appropriate evaluation. So kids shouldn't be subjected to any unnecessary assessments or testing and evaluations or anything like that. Um, Exams or anything like that also has to be geared toward planning for the child's education and their future instruction. Lastly, an appropriate evaluation must determine and make recommendations regarding a child's eligibility for special education services in a timely manner. So you need the faculty needs to take those tests and help them to create lessons for the student in the future, or to determine where the child should be in the classroom, things like that. Another really important factor of IDEA is going to be the Individualized Education Plan, which is also known as an IEP. IEPs have to include information that talk about where the student is at in their academics, or how they are with their annual goals and benchmarking objectives. It has to talk about the services and supplementary aids that are going to be given to the child, and they have to add in any experiences where a student is not participating in the general classroom, as well as providing a reason for why the student's not participating. Next is a least restrictive environment, which basically just says that an IEP team has to explore a number of alternatives for enabling a student to participate in the general education classroom. They need to figure out if the student can be in the general education classroom, can they only be in there part-time, and if they can't be in the general education classroom, should they go to a resource room or should they go to a special school or different things like that. Next is parent participation. This is basically just saying that parents have the right to equal participation in the process. They are allowed to be notified of a planned evaluation. Excuse me. They have access to planning and evaluating materials and involvement in all meetings regarding their child's placement. And lastly, which is also important, parents have the right to refuse further evaluation, which can be good if a parent disagrees with the school district and how they're going to help the child, but can also be bad because some parents might be in denial that their child has autism and might not want that help. So, but it is the parent's decision, so there isn't much we can do about it if it goes against what the IEP team is saying. And the very last one is going to be procedural safeguards. These safeguards protect parental access to information pertaining to placement and transition planning. The procedures are basically just set in place to resolve disagreements between parents and schools regarding the placement of the student. Now, let's go into some examples of early intervention services. So, if a child, an infant or toddler, has a disability or developmental delay in one or more of these developmental areas, the child will likely be eligible for early intervention services. These services will be tailored to meet the needs of the child's individual needs and can include a few different things, such as assistive technology, which we're learning about in my assistive technology class, which could be anything from like wheelchairs to Dynavox or just some other really cool things that you never would really think that even existed but can really help a child. Things like audiology or hearing services, psychological services, speech and language services, counseling and training for a family, physical therapy, medical services, nursing services, nutrition services, and occupational therapy, which, interesting enough, services may also be provided to address the needs and priorities of the child's family. Now, with IDEA, you would think that services might only pertain to the child and what the child's needs are, but there are also family-directed services that are meant to help family members understand the special needs of their child and learn how to enhance his or her development to give them basically the best chance they have at succeeding in the future. So now, who is eligible for early intervention? Well, it is called early intervention, so it is not meant for kids in elementary school or middle school or up or anything like that. Early intervention is basically only really meant for infants and toddlers who have one or more developmental delay or disability. Eligibility is determined by evaluating the child, of course with the parent's consent, to see if the child in fact does have a developmental delay in or some type of disability. Also, eligible children can receive early intervention services from birth through their third birthday. So once they get to their third birthday, they'll stop getting early intervention services and they'll just have like special education services, things like that. But oftentimes these services are put in place from birth through their third birthday is so that children who are diagnosed at birth with a specific condition or who experience specific prematurity, super low birth weight, illness, or surgery soon after being born can have their best chance at being successful and can get the help that they need. So, now what's the issue with earlier intervention? Now, to me, I would think, oh, early intervention, yeah, that's great. Let's give it to all the kids, any kid who needs it. But early intervention services cost a lot, and they're expensive. So a lot of some, not a lot, but I found a couple different sources who believe that early intervention doesn't help enough to make a difference in those who have autism. But if they're like me, there are also people who believe that early intervention can greatly help or diminish the effects of autism. And so you can see how it's a kind of a controversial issue that's going on, because we are seeing, you know, some people who believe that there's nothing you can do for a child who has autism at a young age, and then you see children who aren't getting the help that they desire, or you see parents who don't understand that early intervention exists, and that's a problem because you're having kids who have signs of autism at 18 months old, yet parents don't know what they can do, so they don't get the child help. But I believe that early intervention, it can really help, and I feel like if um I just think that everybody should give it a shot, and that's kind of where I'm thinking about this issue. Um, Next, we're going to go into different historical perspectives of treatment for autism, as well as a little bit on the different views of autism, which I don't have specifically written down. It's kind of just my own ideas from what I've been researching. Looking at these early treatment approaches, you can kind of see what people thought about autism at the time. They were using things like electroconvulsive therapy and dieting to help their kids, not have signs of autism, which, we know now is definitely not the ways to help a child with autism. Um, but it seemed either they were naive in knowing what autism was and understanding it, or they really didn't know what was going on. But they just were kind of trying whatever they could to get rid of it. I think, anyways. Excuse me. Um, Electroconvulsive therapy. Well, because of its association with severe psychiatric illnesses, one of the first treatment approaches for autism was electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. It basically involves passing small electric currents through the brain to intentionally trigger a brief seizure. The resulting seizure episode is hypothesized to change brain chemistry in a way that reduces mental health symptoms, such as severe agitation and self-destructive behaviors. Now, something I found super interesting is that this isn't even proven to work. It's just hypothesized. So they could be doing this to these kids, and they don't even know if it's going to work. They're just trying it because, I mean, what the heck, right? But that's just terrible in my opinion. But one thing I did find out is that, unfortunately, this happens still today. And I just find that so sad because those poor kids, they might not even understand what's going on. It's just terrible. The next early treatment approach that I found was diet, which I have actually heard of people doing this nowadays, but I guess it just started a long time ago because it originated in the 1920s. One school, I'm not sure which school it was. Never mind, I read that wrong. Um, One school of thought is that autism is caused by toxic dietary factors. And then that resulted people in thinking that if you change a child's diet, then autism will go away, which isn't really the case. But they did find that gluten-free and casein-free diets could help lessen those symptoms, because the thought was that the protein found in wheat and milk products, respectively, had been suggested to improve symptoms of autism in children. After those early treatments, we then moved on to a few different treatments. A few of them that we still see today, some of them that we know don't work. The first one is going to be auditory integration training. So this training was based on the theory that the aggressive behaviors in children with autism was caused from hypersensitivity to sound. So in this treatment, they would just expose the child to a bunch of different random songs for different sounds for different variations of time for half an hour sessions over multiple days, thinking that if they basically gave these children enough sounds and kind of overloaded their system with sounds, that it would um, cause these aggressive behaviors to disappear, which I think didn't help and probably only resulted in overwhelming and stressing the child out. The next treatment that we found was a form of aversive punishment. These are common parenting tactics, nothing out really of the usual. It's basically just placing a child in timeout when they misbehave, and the theory is that you punish a child for any unwanted behavior, and then the child would associate the behavior with the punishment and no longer perform the behavior. However, the punishment can be taken to varying degrees. Now, nowadays I don't agree with this tactic. I like to use, or I've heard of using ABA or things like that, where you praise the children for the behavior you want them to do, and instead, helping them to learn what you want them to do and giving them a different idea or something different to do other than what you don't want them to do. The next is holding therapy, which is another psychoanalytic treatment method. It's basically stemming from the notion that autism is caused by a dysfunctional parent-child relationship, which we now know is not the case. But in this treatment, the caregiver, the parent, whoever, physically restrains the child in a restrictive environment, forcing eye contact, which, for one, we know that children with autism have a hard time with eye contact, and we also know that they aren't the biggest fan of being touched or things like that. So I can just see this therapy also providing a bunch of stress for the child. Lastly, we see pharmaceutical treatments. So they've had increasing success in diminishing some of the behaviors of autism. Now, they don't cure autism, but they help with the aggression, irritability, or self-inflicting injurious behaviors. Now, this is definitely something that you still see today. However, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of medications, as I feel sometimes when you give kids sometimes when you give kids with autism medication, it will kind of turn them into little drones that are like half asleep or not paying attention. I don't know. Just I feel like it takes away the child's personality. So I don't think that using pills is always the best idea, but I understand that sometimes you have to protect the child or anything. Now I want to go in and talk to you about the current views and practices of behavioral therapy. So before, you could see that people are just kind of trying anything they could to help the autism, and they didn't quite understand what autism was and how it worked. And now we can see a bigger rise in behavioral therapy, and so now we kind of view that I the idea of autism is present from birth, and so it's not something that just all of a sudden shows up. And so we believe that it's a biological condition that paved the way for psychopharmacological interventions. And second, we now think that autism is a social and emotional disorder, distinct from other mental illnesses, and should be treated as such. So, forcing a child to go out and talk with their peers is not going to help them, especially if they can't speak. And so we need to be able to help these children in a way that can actually help them, not electrocuting their brains, not forcing them to maintain eye contact, but just being a positive light for them and encouraging them and helping them the best that we can. Another interesting thing is that the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and Prevention estimates that autism spectrum disorders occur in approximately 1 out of every 68 children. And we also found out that it's more prevalent in boys than girls. And although most obvious symptoms of autism typically appear between 2 and 3 years old, autism can be diagnosed as early as 18 months in children. And now, early diagnosis and intervention of children with autism is critical, and it greatly improves the outcomes of the disorder. The CDC recommends regular screenings of young children for signs of autism, and parents are encouraged to monitor early signs and symptoms and bring any concerns to the attention of the pediatrician. So now we can see that we believe that it is an emotional social disorder. We believe that it can be corrected through time, and the sooner that you diagnose it, the better. Now, my view. I believe early intervention is a great thing. I think that we should try to help as many kids as possible and diagnose it as soon as we can. I think it'll really help to lessen the symptoms of autism or even cure the symptoms of autism. And now, like I said earlier, you can't get rid of the diagnosis of autism, but you can definitely help it to make sure that the symptoms go away. Um, I also think the more kids we help at a younger age, the better off more kids will be, because it has been proven that the younger the child is when you start early intervention, the greater the chances will be that the child will succeed in life and have less problems with their symptoms. Now, I just want to talk to you about some court cases revolving around early intervention of autism. Um, this first case, pretty famous case. I just wanted to talk about it because it involves FAPE, and I believe that FAPE is really important when it comes to early intervention. And so, this case was called the Board of Education versus Rowley. Um, Amy Rowley was a deaf student in a public school in Peekskill, New York. Prior to beginning the kindergarten year, her parents, who themselves were also deaf, met with administrators to develop an IEP for her, which at first she was given a sign language interpreter that followed her around the classroom. But after a week or two after, the interpreter said that the child did not even need his services. And so for the rest of the year, she was put on an FM wireless hearing aid and had to rely on her ability to read lips. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were deaf in a classroom and I were in first grade, I probably would not be sufficient in sign language. I probably could not depend on reading lips to get every method of communication or anything, any message. But I don't. I'm just surprised that she did as well as she did, because in the article I read, she did about 60% as well as the other students. Now, that's still almost failing, but um, if you can consider her needs and everything, she did have a 40% disadvantage, but that's 40% that she's not getting out of her education. And I think props to her for doing so well as she did with what she was given, but I definitely believe that she needed more than that too. Um, and then after her kindergarten year ended and her first year started, she her IEP team wrote up a new IEP for her, and which was required by the EHA. And Rowley was again given the hearing aid and no interpreter. She did, however, get instruction from a tutor for one-on-one, uh, for 1 hour per day and speech therapy for 3 hours a week. But Rowley's parents requested that the school provided a sign language interpreter of other forms of assistance identified in the IEP. Now, they were not providing that for her, so the Rowleys then filed suit in the U.S. District Court, naming the school district as defendant. The district court judge found that because Rowley lacked an interpreter, she understands considerably less of what goes on in the class than she would if she were not deaf. And she's also learning, and she's not learning as much, and she's not performing as well academically as she would if she didn't have her handicap. The judge concluded that Rowley was not receiving a free and appropriate public education, which he defined in her case as an opportunity to achieve her full potential, commensurate with the opportunity provided to other children. In an opinion for a 6-3 majority written by Justice William Rehnquist, the Supreme Court reversed the Second Circuit's decision. Rehnquist argued that both the District Court and the Second Circuit had inappropriately ignored the definition of free appropriate public education. Now, if you remember, that is basically saying that public schools need to provide any and all services that a child may need pertaining to their education that would help them to succeed and grow in the future. Excuse me. The very next court case that I wanted to go over was again the Young family against a school district in Ohio. I'm not 100% which school district it was, as it was really hard to find the actual court papers for it, and I could not do that. But this lawsuit, it was filed by Robert and Holly Young of Williamsburg. They lived about 25 miles east of Cincinnati, and they had a 2-year-old son named Roman. At 2 years old, Roman was diagnosed with moderate to severe autism a year and a half ago. Oh, so I'm sorry, I read that wrong. He was 2 years old and was diagnosed with moderate to severe autism about a year and a half ago. Um, the Youngs argued that Roman, who does not speak and has many other difficulties, needs about 46 hours of applied behavioral analysis a week, including 33 hours of in-home one-on-one time with a therapist. And that's based on diagnoses and recommendations that the Youngs had from various different autism experts, including doctors at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital and Dayton-based Trumpet Behavioral Health. So their demands were not ridiculous. These demands were told that to them that they needed to help their son. Their son was 2 years old, does not speak, and is clearly going to need help in the future. And the more help that he has now, the better he will be. So it was great that his parents were advocating for him at such a young age. And unfortunately, the Young said that the state reportedly denied the request for the intensive therapy, and all they would offer was just 2 hours of speech therapy a month. And now he's 2 years old already and doesn't speak. Now, is 2 hours of speech therapy a month really going to actually help this student? No, it's not. So, like the students, I believe that they were not holding up to the um, laws and following FAPE. And so, besides the 46 hours of therapy each week for Roman, the lawsuit seeks more than $3 million in compensatory damages for the Young family and a declaration that the state systematically violates the rights of infants and toddlers with disabilities when it unilaterally and categorically excludes certain early intervention services. Now, I do think that $3 million was a lot of money, but they must have been going to therapy a lot because they believe that Roman required 46 hours a week. So you can see how those receipts and whatever would rack up a lot of money. Um, but in the end, though, the family did get more than $142,000 in a settlement agreement. I'm not 100% sure on what that does for in-home visits or therapy or things like that, but I guess that money will go to help them with the cost of therapy in the past couple years or anything like that. One interesting thing that I learned about reading this article or reading about this court case, was that this lawsuit came just 3 days before Governor John Kasich expressed his support of a plan for the state to require health insurance companies to cover therapy and treatment for children with autism starting in 2014, which I didn't know this, but insurance companies didn't really want to provide any therapy or treatment for children with autism. I guess I kind of assumed that that was something that they would provide, because though it's not a mental health disorder, it is a disability, and so I just thought that maybe that they would already do that, but I'm really happy that they're doing it now. So now let's take a look at what different researchers and contributors are saying. Autism Speaks, which is, I feel, a very well-known organization. They did a study and found that 1 in 14 toddlers entering an early intervention program in the Bronx overcame their autism disorder by grade school. But the vast majority continued to struggle with emotional or behavioral disorders that warranted special education services. Lead researcher Lisa Schulman of New York City's Albert Einstein College of Medicine presented her team's findings today at the annual meeting of the Pediatric Academic Societies in San Diego. The researchers tracked 569 children diagnosed with autism as toddlers. They re-evaluated the children before they entered elementary school, and on average, 4 years after they began receiving early intervention services. The re-evaluations then showed that 38, just 38, of the 569 children had improved to the point that they would no longer receive a first-time diagnosis of autism. Autism is considered lifelong, so children wouldn't lose their diagnosis even with dramatic improvement. However, most of the 38 children had tested as intellectually disabled, with an IQ below 70 as toddlers. But upon reevaluation, all of them scored within a normal intellectual range. So that causes me to think that maybe the children caught up developmentally, or maybe the children did not understand that. I don't know, but it's just an interesting fact that I found when reading this article. Um, However, despite these improvements in social and intellectual abilities, 35 out of the 38 children, which is 92%, still needed mental health or special education services. And so that's quite a lot, I believe. Um, Even with the early intervention services, most of them still need help, which that even though they still need help doesn't mean that they're not better off. So I still feel like early intervention is a great thing. But roughly 2/3 of these children had some type of language or learning disability. Nearly half had had behavior problems such as ADHD or disruptiveness, and 1 in 4 had emotional disorders such as severe anxiety or OCD, and nearly 3 out of 4 still needed some type of special education services. Next, I read an article called Long-Term Outcomes of Early Interventions in 6-year-old Children with Autism Spectrum Disorder by Annette Estes, Jeffrey Munson, Sally J. Rogers, Jessica Greason, Jamie Winter, Geraldine Dawson. Now, this was written as like a lab report type thing, and I did my best to try and understand it, but you know that in lab reports they are written very formally and tend to use bigger words, so I did my best. But in this study, they examined evidence for the sustained effects of early intervention based on a followed-up study of 39 children with ASD who began participation in a randomized clinical trial testing the effectiveness of Early Start Denver model EDSM at age 18 to 30 months. I believe that Early Start Denver model must just be a specific type of intervention therapy for children with ASD. That's just what I think. But this intervention conducted at a high level of intensity in home for 2 years and showed evidence of efficacy immediately post-treatment. This group of children was assessed at age 6 years, 2 years after the intervention ended, and across multiple domains of functioning by clinicians naive to previous intervention group status. The ESDM group, on average, maintained gains made in early intervention during the 2-year follow-up period in overall intellectual ability, adaptive behavior, symptom severity, and challenging behavior. However, no group differences in core autism symptoms were found immediately post-treatment. But 2 years later, the ESDM group demonstrated improved core autism symptoms and adaptive behavior as compared with the community intervention as usual group. Which I think, if I'm reading it correctly, means that the group with the high level intensity in-home treatment therapy did much better than the control group, which I think is the community intervention as usual group. They did find that the two groups were not significantly different in terms of intellectual function at age 6, but both groups received equivalent intervention hours during the original study. However, the ESDM group received fewer hours during the follow-up period. The very last article I read from a contributor was by Carly M. Kavanaugh. This was a thesis called Teachers' Perceptions of Interventions for Children with Autism in a School Setting. She wrote about how she believed an important aspect of psychoeducation is early intervention. She thinks that the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, states that individuals who present developmental delays are eligible for services as early as 36 months of age. The early intervention services provided through the IDEA are managed by each U.S. state and allow parents to ask for professional evaluation of the child, meaning that she would, well, not that she thinks this, but she does think it, but it's part of IDEA that parents have the right to get evaluation for the child to see if that they can be qualified to get early intervention services. In addition, children with ASDs who receive services prior to 48 months of age mark greater improvements than those who enter programs after 48 months of age, which meaning that early intervention really does help. And the sooner you diagnose and start the intervention, the better. Therefore, early intervention seems important in planning individualized long-term management of children with ASD. She even goes as far to say that early intervention is critical in treating ASD. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about outcomes of early intervention and prevention of autism. Like mentioned earlier, in the Ohio case, more and more health insurance are providing coverage for kids with autism, which I just think is wonderful. There are also early intervention services like Head Start available for students with autism, and there are special education schools like Little Lighthouse in Tulsa to help kids with autism, and there's even like the Griffin Promise to provide therapy for kids with autism. And I think in general the world is just becoming more open to helping kids with autism, especially those who have it at a young age, and it's becoming more common for early intervention practices to occur. And that is my project. These are my sources. I really had a lot of fun learning about early intervention, and I'm definitely really passionate about it. And I know I'm just kind of hitting the tip of the iceberg, but I'm really excited to learn more. Thank you. Goodbye.